A low-hanging fog blanketed the valley like a ragged burial shroud on a moonless night. Even at noon, sunlight faded into a pale, sickly glow that did nothing to banish the oppressive gloom. Locals called the place the Valley of the Forsaken, though few dared speak its name aloud. At the heart of this unhappy expanse lay the bog, a dark expanse of stagnant water, rotting foliage, and tangled vines. The surface of the water appeared motionless from a distance, but those with keen eyes swore they saw faint ripples, as if something large and hungry stirred beneath. The foul stench of the bog drifted outward in pungent waves, a smell of decay that clung to clothes and hair, warning the unwary that whatever lay hidden there was neither natural nor benign. Legends whispered through the nearby villages told of drowned men and women who rose again when the moon was at its thinnest sliver. You would hear the stories late at night, told by old men who had seen too much. They spoke of a swelling in the foul waters, followed by pale figures clawing their way up through mats of creepers and mud, their hollow eyes trained on the living with unspeakable hunger. Others spoke of creeping vines that moved of their own accord, snagging ankles and dragging people down with the slow, inexorable pressure of a noose tightening around a sinner's neck. Whether the undead or the vines were the worst danger was a matter of debate. In hushed corners, people swore the bog itself was alive, an ancient and unholy force feeding on the souls of those foolish enough to wander too close. This was the place that fascinated Constance Merewood, a traveling scholar drawn to shadowed corners and obscure lore. She had heard tales of the bog's strange phenomena for years, restless spirits, half-decayed bodies shambling along the muddy banks, rotted hands rising from the water at dusk. Such accounts sparkled with the kind of grotesque intrigue that had always tempted her away from the safety of conventional life. She arrived in the nearby village on a chill autumn evening, when the mist was thick and the day's light was already draining into an indigo sky. It took little effort to find lodging in a squat inn that reeked of wet wool and spiced lentil. The villagers eyed her warily, her accent marking her as an outsider. But she was used to that. Her life's work required frequent travel to remote places, and hers was a presence as unsettling to some villagers as the bog itself. While the locals offered her meager hospitality, their tongues loosened grudgingly around crackling hearth fires, beckoning her closer. They repeated the old rumors. Lost travelers found days later, pale and bloated, after the bog spat them suddenly back onto the banks. Skeletal remains fused with clumps of vines, shredded garments still clinging to bony limbs. Each retelling was more horrific than the last. One old woman named Lorna recalled her own sister's disappearance as a girl, a single scream into the night, then silence and a wide drag mark in the mud leading into the water. The anguished family saw no trace of her until nearly a month later, when her sister's broken body washed up, eyes dull and expression contorted. Lorna claimed she had glimpsed the drowned girl again on a starless night, stumbling along the shallows before sinking back into the bog. Nobody dared contradict her. People said Lorna was mad, but in their eyes shone the same dark shadow of fear. Constance recorded these accounts diligently in her battered leather notebook, the flickering lamplight making it difficult to keep her handwriting neat. She spent long hours jotting down each story while the wind outside moaned against the walls. As she wrote, the stench of the bog reached her even inside the inn, slithering under the door and piercing the pungent aroma of the inn's stew. She forced herself to eat despite a rolling, nauseous sense of dread pooling in her stomach. In the corridor, water dripped from aging rafters, matching the distant plip-plop of droplets that must be falling from the bog's twisted branches. When she eventually slept, her dreams were populated by rotting vines that snaked across the floor in her direction, reaching out for her wrists and ankles. Morning brought no relief, as the ever-present mist lay draped over the world, a silent judge of her intention to investigate further. The inn's inhabitants were tight-lipped at dawn, refusing her questions with solemn shakes of their heads. Only old Lorna gave Constance a warning, Stay out of the bog's reach. It knows when fresh meat arrives. It can sense your curiosity, child, as surely as those starved vines sense a warm body. No knowledge is worth your soul. Unsettled yet undeterred, Constance thanked her and left the inn behind, taking the winding dirt road that descended into the valley. The path was flanked by dead trees, their branches twisted like arthritic claws. Thick vines coiled around trunks and slithered across the sodden ground, as if they were bored snakes awaiting prey. Every step Constance took made a soggy crunch that broke the surrounding hush. A hush broken now and then by the faint squelching sound somewhere in the distance, something large and dragging itself through the mud. An ominous sense of being watched prickled her skin, yet she never saw another living soul. The deeper she ventured, the more difficult it became to breathe. The air felt damp and stale, heavy with the sharp tang of rotting organic material. She gripped her walking stick with white-knuckle determination and pressed on. It took nearly an hour to reach the bog. Even in the gloom, Constance could see it was a broad expanse of dark water shimmering dully beneath a canopy of ghostly mist. The smell nearly choked her, an overpowering blend of decomposing algae and wet, moldering vegetation. Cattails protruded here and there, drooping like sorrowful sentinels. Vines coiled on the muddy banks, weaving an impenetrable mat. As Constance took her first step off the path, one of the vines stirred. It wasn't the subtle sway of silt-laden plants in the breeze. It was a deliberate movement, reacting to her presence. She froze mid-step. For a moment the vine halted as well. Then it stretched slowly like a cat awakening, revealing unseen tendrils that reached out across the ground. Her heart hammered. With a trembling breath, she forced herself to remain calm, reminding herself that curiosity had led her here. She advanced in measured steps, testing each bit of footing before placing her weight. The vine remained just at the edge of her vision, swaying with something like quiet anticipation. At a certain distance from the water, Constance carefully set down her pack and looked for a reasonably stable vantage point among the twisted roots of a fallen tree. Once settled, she began sketching, capturing the lethargic swirl of the bog surface and the peculiar shapes that lay just beneath. It was midday, by her estimation, when she noticed a figure near the distant edge of the water. The figure appeared to be a woman, wearing robes tattered with muck. Sunken shoulders and a stooped form gave her a wraith-like silhouette. Constance's heart skipped. She could not recall another traveler in this forsaken area. Anxiety churned in her gut, but she called out anyway, her voice tentative. "Hello?" The figure turned, revealing a face half obscured by mud and waterlogged hair. At that distance, Constance could not see details, but the angle of the figure's head and the dark hollows where eyes should be ignited a deep-seated alarm. The figure raised one hand slowly, in what might have been greeting or maybe entreaty. Suddenly the vines around the figure's ankles jerked violently, yanking the figure backward into the water with a hideous splash. Out of the corner of her eye, Constance saw dozens of vines ripple across the bog's surface, radiating from the center like the arms of an octopus. The woman, or whatever it was, struggled, limbs flailing. A keening wail cut through the heavy silence, chilling Constance's blood. She clamped her hands over her ears as the sound twisted into a strangled gargle. In another instant, all that remained was the rippling water and the thick vines lying quiescent beneath the surface once more. Nausea tore through Constance, her rationale warring with the overwhelming horror of what she had just witnessed. She dropped her pencil and stared at the water, searching for any sign of life or movement. At first, all was still. Then, she noticed a faint swirl in the center of the bog. Several pale shapes appeared, heads and shoulders emerging slowly, faces slack and milky-eyed, new figures of the drowned, the living dead. They wore ragged clothing plastered to decaying flesh, though some looked centuries old. Their skin and bones melted with fibrous vines. As they rose, murky algae dripped off them. There were half a dozen, maybe more, drifting toward the part of the bank where Constance sat, transfixed in a sickening mixture of horror and fascination. She scrambled to her feet and tried to back away, but her left foot snagged on a thin vine that seemed to coil around her boot by sheer will. She kicked at it wildly, her breath coming in short, desperate huffs. The vine did not let go. The undead figures reached the shallow banks, moving with limp, uneven strides. Their eyes, empty gray cavities flecked with black sludge, remained locked on Constance. She felt the pull of the bog as it seemed to beckon her in. Adrenaline flared. She grabbed her walking stick and hacked viciously at the vine binding her foot. The vine loosened, its severed piece writhing on the ground like a beheaded snake. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance, then turned and ran. The route back was a bewildering labyrinth of twisted roots, unstable mud, and creeping vines. More than once, she felt tendrils brush her ankles, but each time she kicked free before they could tighten. After what felt like hours of breathless flight, she collapsed behind a cluster of gnarled oak trunks, her heart pounding so fiercely it echoed in her ears. Leaning against rough bark, she forced herself to regain composure, to keep her mind from spinning out of reason. This was no ordinary place, and the stories were all too real. The bog had indeed coughed up its drowned dead, and the vines, starved and malevolent, were eager to drag down new victims. She had to warn the villagers, but a deeper part of her recognized that she couldn't simply walk away. There was a driving need to understand what evil force acted here. Where had those revenants come from, truly? Why were the vines so cursed? Rather than return to the village, Constance climbed a narrow ridge overlooking the bog. Up there, the ground was firmer, the vantage more commanding. She scanned the mire, noticing that the water seemed to pulse, as if it had a heartbeat. Clouds of mist swirled across the surface, intermittently revealing scattered lumps, the partial forms of drowned bodies or decaying, waterlogged trees. Under the rotted trunks and algae-slick surfaces, the vines slithered. She realized that the vine system covered an enormous portion of the bog, weaving a tapestry of twisted roots and ghastly shapes. Perhaps, she thought, the vines themselves were reanimating the corpses, connecting the once living flesh to the bog's unholy essence. She found a rocky outcrop where the foliage was minimal. Huddling there, she scoured her memory for anything in her studies that could even approximate this phenomenon. Bogs and swamps had long been rumored to hold curses and restless spirits, but this level of malevolence seemed beyond natural. The stories of undead soared through her mind, melding with half-remembered lines from ancient texts describing necromancy or cursed grounds. She carefully looked through her notes, her pencil shaking as she reread the villager's account. Something caught her eye. Mentions of a strange, spidery symbol etched into a boulder near the water's edge, rumored to be older than any of the local settlements. Could it be some rite that bound the souls of the drowned to the bog? That same boulder was said to have cracks leaking a sickly green glow at night, though no living soul had seen it in decades. Driven by a mixture of dread and desire for answers, Constance decided she had to see that boulder for herself. She waited as the pale day sank into a gray twilight. The swirling mist thickened, making each step precarious. Before long, shapes melded into the gloom, leaving only silhouettes and half-whispered sounds. The wind sighed, carrying distant, sorrowful moans that might have been the calls of night birds or the lamentations of the restless dead. Constance inched along the ridge, descending from the relative safety of higher ground with each deliberate footfall. A faint glow caught her eye, pulsing through the drifting fog like a dying lantern. She followed it, carefully avoiding the slick mud pools and the shifting vines that snaked across the ground. At last, she found the boulder. It was enormous, shaped like a massive skull, half buried in the muck. Carvings snaked across its surface, in patterns that seemed to squirm by lantern light. Constance held her breath as she touched the stone, feeling a vibration under her palm, a low hum that resonated through her bones. Sickness churned in her stomach. She peered into a deep crack in the boulder's center. From it seeped a faint greenish luminescence that clung to the stone like a ghostly fungus. Beneath the hum, she could almost discern a rhythmic throb, like the beat of an ancient heart. Dark shapes moved in her peripheral vision. She turned to see 3 ghastly silhouettes emerging from the water, vines draped across their bodies like a macabre coat. They shambled forward, arms outstretched, hunched postures revealing spines twisted with rot and vegetation. Their mouths gaped open as though screaming, even though no sound emerged. Constance's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to run, but a part of her was rooted to the spot, compelled by the boulder's dark influence. One of the undead stumbled forward, bits of swamp matter sloshing off its decayed torso. Its eyes, milky and unblinking, fixed upon Constance with insatiable hunger. She forced herself to act, stepping back and thrusting her walking stick at the creature's chest. It staggered, but did not fall. Another advanced from her right, dragging a rusted chain behind it, as though it had once been shackled underwater. She took a desperate step backward, but the vines were faster. They seized her ankles, locking tight. She fell onto her back, the wind knocked out of her lungs. Mud splashed into her face, stinging her eyes and filling her mouth with a foul bitterness. Struggling, she tried to yank her legs free, but the vines coiled higher, snaring her calves and binding her to the bog's filthy ground. In a rising panic, she reached for her belt, where she kept her small dagger. Her fingers slick with mud, fumbled the handle, almost dropping it. With a cry of defiance, she slashed at the vines, severing several. The writhing ends released foul-smelling sap that oozed out. Yet more vines crept in, replacing those she had cut, creeping inexorably up toward her knees. The undead creatures drew closer, their silent moans now audible as faint hisses. Constance's vision blurred with terror. She stabbed at the vines again, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill in the air. The sound of tearing flesh and snapping vines assaulted her ears, along with the unholy stench rising from the ground. One of the creatures reached her, a rotted hand brushing against her shoulder. Its touch was icy, draining warmth from her body the moment it made contact. She twisted violently away, slicing into the mass of vines that tethered her, ignoring the sharp sting of branches raking her arms. Finally, she managed to free one leg. A wave of relief coursed through her as she wrenched her other foot out from the half-cut vines. With both legs free, she scrambled to her feet, half-crouched. She smashed the end of her walking stick into the creature's skull, feeling soft bone crumble beneath the blow. It reeled, collapsing into the mud. The second creature lunged, and Constance slashed with her dagger. Rancid fluid sprayed from a gash across its chest, but it continued forward, unstoppable. She realized she could not simply fight them all. More shapes loomed in the mist, drawn by her frantic struggles. Summoning what energy remained, she mustered a final push, surging past the lurching figures and sliding around the boulder's side. Her foot caught on something, nearly sending her sprawling, but she used the momentum to half-run, half-stumble up the slope. The vines lashed out, still thirsting to latch onto her, but she remained just beyond their grasp. Terror lent speed to her flight. She dashed through the swirling mists, heart pounding ceaselessly. The moaning of the undead rose behind her, echoing from the bog with a collective, despairing wail that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She could sense their frustration, could almost feel the bog itself recoil in anger that its prey might escape. After an interminable sprint, she found herself near the ridgeline. Gasping for air, she collapsed against a half-sunken tree trunk, its bark flaking into her hands. A glance back revealed only fog and darkness, but she suspected that the slow, trudging shapes still moved somewhere beyond sight. She knew she had to escape this valley altogether, to warn the world of what oozed and crawled here. Yet she also sensed that no matter how far she fled, the nightmares birthed by the bog would linger in her thoughts, an unshakable brand etched into her subconscious. By the dim starlight that barely penetrated the gloom overhead, Constance navigated her way back toward the village. Each step seemed never-ending, beset by nerve-shredding anxiety that at any moment a vine might snag her again, or a drowned figure might lurch out from behind a withered trunk. The shadows loomed taller, playing tricks on her mind. At times, she thought she saw pale hands beckoning from the bog's edge. Other times, she heard faint splashes, as if some monstrous creature had submerged itself. The fog parted occasionally, revealing glimpses of gray water shimmering with unnatural luminescence. She tried not to dwell on the possibility that the boulder itself plotted her downfall. Her rational mind urged her to keep moving, to keep living, even as her curiosity questioned whether the bog had once been pure before falling to a malignant curse. It was nearly dawn by the time she stumbled onto the village road, where the local farmland, though barren, offered at least a modest reprieve. The sight of a ramshackle fence gave her a sudden, overwhelming relief. She leaned against the coarse slats, swallowing back tears of gratitude that she had escaped, at least for now. Far behind her, obscured by layers of mist, lay the cursed bog, restless and hungry. Its vines would wait, its drowned revenants would wander, all of them tethered to that ancient, pulsing power that rose from beneath the ground. Constance knew that others would stumble into the valley eventually. Foolhardy travelers seeking shortcuts, misled pilgrims in search of solitude, or those drawn by the same dark curiosity that had nearly claimed her tonight. She did not know if the evil could be purged, if the boulder could be destroyed or the restless dead finally released from their watery prison. But she did know she would share her account and that perhaps her warning might spare a few souls. She already dreaded that some who listened would not believe her, or worse, be tempted to investigate. She closed her eyes, recalling the frantic struggle in which vines slithered greedily for her flesh and rotted arms clawed at her. She tasted mud in her mouth, a memory so vivid she thought she might retch. Then she took a trembling breath and forced herself onward, though horror clung to her every step. No matter how far she ran, the image of that bog lived on in her mind. The stench of death and decay was no phantom odor. It was real, unstoppable, and ancient. Those who drowned there did not rest, and the living were but morsels for the vines lurking in the shadow. The misty valley, silent under a grim sky, held a malignant secret that would forever haunt Constance Merewood. For it was not merely a place where the dead returned to walk. No, the bog itself was alive, and those who felt its starving tendrils around their ankles never truly returned. And so the legend would remain, half known and wholly feared, a perpetual testament to the lurking horrors best left undisturbed beneath the veil of swirling mist.